who had the biggest fall from grace in history. Had you asked me a couple of years ago, I'd say Vidkun Quisling. He was one of the last men to be given the death penalty in my country, and his last name is listed as a synonym for a cowardly traitor in our dictionary. He essentially sold us out to the Nazis during World War II. The thing is that he was previously seen as a good humanitarian, traveling to other countries to help the poor with Fridtjof Nansen, a national hero who won the Nobel Peace Prize. But it has later been revealed, only a couple of years ago, that he was never a good man from the start and was in fact always a vile opportunist, regardless of what affiliation he needed to have in order to further his own reputation and build his own grandiose sense of self. Under the guise of his humanitarian work, he'd loot values from dead, dying people and give desperate, starving people food scraps or pennies for very expensive valuables, if he didn't just take them. He'd also take advantage of desperate young women. Those who had lost their families were the easiest targets after all. His first wife was a 17-year-old Ukrainian girl named Alexandra. Even his family members were confused about it. He also got a second wife, Maria Quisling, so in addition, he was also a bigamist. Seeing the pictures and notes of what he saw in famine-stricken areas just makes what he did worse. In one of his photos, he had visited a house with two starving boys, whose parents had presumably died, and Irk, the remaining boy in this picture, had eaten his 3-year-old brother, Google Holodomor, if you don't know about this famine. The thought of this gut-wrenching despair not fazing a man, not making him question what he's doing, and just continuing on to prey on people, just makes me sick. I didn't think I could find a literal traitor to my country more deplorable decades after his execution, but learning what an absolutely deplorable, opportunistic narcissist he was just made him even worse. To think that he was a revered humanitarian at one point. I'm glad he was executed, though I wish they had paraded him around so people could throw tomatoes at him first. Edit. Changed my mind and some details I misremembered from school, and added a link detailing some of the information that was revealed last year. Arteps, Wordebeunak, no documental Rexlopacha Dom Overlandsvickeren, Vidkun Quisling, 1.15,457,160 It's in Norwegian, but Google Translate should do. The rest should be a quick Google search away. There are also some thesis papers available, but those are in Norwegian too. Quisling is legit the word for a collaborating traitor in English too. His name is such a perfectly weasel-sounding name for it too. It just sounds gross and already has the ling suffix on it. Jimmy Savile, if you allow for posthumous falls from grace. Let me paint you a picture. Here is the ultimate working-class boy made good. He worked as a coal miner during the Second World War. Once that was over, he tried a number of things. He was a professional wrestler for a while, lost every match, was a pioneer DJ. He essentially invented the job and hosted a prime-time TV show well into his 70s based on the premise of fulfilling outlandish dreams for kids. In his spare time, he worked as a volunteer porter at his local hospital and ran marathons, raising millions of pounds for charities, attracting a slew of honors. And while he may have been a bit eccentric, he was widely regarded as a national treasure. That is, until a couple of years after he died. Turns out Jimmy had a thing for young girls. Quite a thing, as it happens. He made Bill Cosby look like the angel Gabriel. We are talking one step below, wandering around the TV studios, where he worked with a 12-year-old latched onto his penis. He'd got away with it precisely because of his public persona. He successfully persuaded almost all the girls he abused that nobody would ever believe them. Not just young kids, mentally handicapped adults, the elderly, corpses. He was unbelievably vile. One of the reasons he worked at hospitals was because he was a necrophiliac and had access to the morgue. His documentary made me feel something I can't explain. I was lost for words. The absolute most depressing thing is that Savile died knowing that he was loved. He got away with everything, and that really, really stinks. Not just young girls, but young boys, disabled people, dead people. If they couldn't consent, he was there. One wonders if he ever had a consensual sexual encounter in his life. After he died and the stories started coming out and everything came to light was nothing short of shocking. For the first time in my life did I fully understand what people mean when they say someone was a monster. The man was so vile and despicable that he was an actual monster. A thing for young girls is an understatement, buddy. By the time I was a child, Bill Cosby was so universally recognized as an icon of wholesome comedy that one of the most popular kids' shows of my youth was literally just a cartoon about his childhood. Now the legacy of that little cartoon show is tainted by the very subject of the show itself. That's a fall from grace. From being trusted to be a part of your kid's formative years, to becoming one of the most vile and disliked man of all time. I don't know how I didn't realize that Little Bill was by Cosby until right now. Guess I just never paid enough attention. That's quite a stain on my childhood now. Most people are talking like the last decade, but Mary I of England came to my mind first, overcame huge threats as obstacles to her right to the throne because she had the support and love of the people. She defeated the attempted coup, ascended to the throne, showed mercy to the traitors, etc., then promptly married an unpopular foreigner and tried to force everyone to follow her religion. If they didn't, they got burned alive. Then hubby skipped town anyway, and Mary slowly lost her marbles and Calais, and kept burning people alive. History tends to remember her younger half-sister Elizabeth I a bit more favorably. Edit. Ong, what have I done, my friends? Tudor history is awesome, and dramatic, and insane, and fucking tragic, and very well documented by multiple contemporary sources. Go check it out. 100 years of more drama than you can imagine. For those saying Elizabeth killed more for religion than Mary did, here's someone who did some sourced quick and dirty math. At Haps, all things Robert Dudley. WordPress, com 2019-21, did good Queen Bess kill more people for religion than bloody Mary also. Mary did all her executions over the space of her 5-year reign. Elizabeth I reigned for 45 years and still managed to execute fewer people. I am still sympathetic to Mary I. Her life fucking sucked for about 1,000 reasons. Important update here, user Keithithuses. Important update here, user Keithithuses has pointed out that Mary died on this day, November 17, 1550. I'm pretty sure we all need to go into the nearest bathroom, close the door, turn off the lights and say Bloody Mary 3 times.
And just, hope for the best.
I mean, they didn't name the drink Bloody Mary because she donated blood for the needy. Yay, honestly, Mary doesn't get talked about enough. Honestly, reading her life, it kind of feels like one big tragedy. Ironically, if her brother had never died, she might have been happier. The fact a 15-year-old boy was king and made the decision to attempt and remove Mary from the line of succession because he supposed correctly that she would reverse the Protestant reforms that had taken place during his reign blows my mind. I was only thinking about video games and girls at 15, and I was really stupid. He was never the biggest star, but Mark Salling's fall from grace was massive. Went from the star of a primetime show to charged with child porn and dead in a matter of months. On that note, Alison Mack went from the actress of the breakout character on a long-running popular superhero show to a cult leader who trafficked women for sex and forced labor, blackmailed them, branded them, and tortured them. Nationally, internationally, you of course have megastars and politicians. On a local level, I submit predatory doctor and religious leader David Farley, 200 accusers. Unless you're the Dar who disputes that number by saying there were only over 100 victims that came forward. So somewhere between 101 and 299. Of course, he still has his defenders, but he retired and moved out of state to be with his family basically overnight. Note that his retirement email was sent to his patients, some of whom had appointments scheduled, without mention of losing his license to practice medicine or the lawsuit news article dropping that week. Accusations range from medical malpractice to sexual assault from girls and women of all ages. When he slipped out of state to be with his family, he was substitute teaching within days next door in Idaho and has now moved to Utah. At least half his kids aren't speaking with him, but my parents assure me it's all made up because, and I quote, he really helped us out when he was sick. Yes, I know him personally, and yes, I believe the victims, and yes, I believe the victims, and yes, I will share this story anywhere it comes up neutral. Dude should be in prison forever. Not the farthest, but Phil Spector is worth a dishonorary mention. Ian Watkins, former singer of the Welsh emo rock band Lost Prophets, massively successful band in the scene. Turns out he dealt meth to fans, to abuse them, and then raped their babies, toddlers. Yes, you read right. I almost threw up when I read the indictment. Locked away for life, that one. The band has erased all music from all services as far as possible. It's tainted forever. I read the case file. Holy cow. And when asked why he did what he did, he said he did it for the laws. His password was "I fuck kids," and 2 of the infants' mothers saw their own babies out to him. There are text messages detailing the abuse they were planning to subject the infants to. I read the court transcripts of what he did to those children, and I will never be the same. Not much gets to me. I am a huge true crime fan, but that was too much for me. It affected me profoundly. Fuck that guy. I hope he is in Gen Pop. Philippe Pétain was a national hero of France after World War I. He won the 9-month Battle of Verdun as a general and inspired hope and optimism at a time when it seemed like the war would never end. Fast forward to World War II, and he became the head of state of Vichy France and was a puppet for the Nazis. He ran Vichy state in a semi-fascist manner and constantly sought to appease the Nazis, to preserve Vichy's limited freedoms, including signing anti-Semitic ordinances and allowing deportation to concentration camps. At the end of the war, he was convicted of treason on all counts and originally sentenced to death before being reduced to life imprisonment by Charles de Gaulle on account of Pétain's advanced age and service during World War I. De Gaulle would later summarize Pétain's life as successively banal, then glorious, then deplorable, but never mediocre, and also the Marshal is a great man, who died in 1925. The trouble is, he didn't know it. China had a similar person. Wang Jingwei was beloved for his role in the 1911 revolution, but is now viewed terribly for siding with the Japanese in Weech. His fate was different, though. He died in 1944 from a wound he got from an assassination attempt in 1939. His tomb was destroyed by the Rock Army, and his burial place now has a note that calls him a traitor, taking life long enough to be the villain a bit too literal. Jimmy Savile, mega famous UK radio DJ and TV presenter, did a ton of charity work, was a knight of the realm. Post-death, he was revealed to be a massive pedophile protected and ignored by those around him for decades. Edit, Savile, not Savile. A massive pedophile doesn't do it justice. He was one of the most vicious and prolific pedophiles ever in the UK's history, apparently. Johnny Rotten of all people called him out in the 1970s. Don't forget Johnny Rotten from the Sex Pistols did a BBC radio interview 70s or 80s, I think it was. John mentioned he wanted to kill a few people. When the reporter asked who, his response was Jimmy Savile. We all know he's doing things he shouldn't be, but we can't talk about that, can we? Or something like that. Needless to say, that interview never saw the light of day until the sick bastard was dead. This blows my mind. I saw a single clip of him on the Netflix special about him and was like, oh hell, no, that dude is creepy as fuck. I don't understand how he was seen as charming. He was a necrophiliac on top of it all. That fucker always gave me the creeps, to be honest, even before he was outed. I wasn't surprised in the least. I'm sure there are worse people, but Harvey Weinstein went from being one of the most powerful people in the world to be completely reviled and losing everything. This is the guy who had Meryl Streep and Oprah on speed dial and married to a woman 1,000 too attractive for him. He now uses a walker, has lost his fortune and his reputation, and his dick is literally rotting off. In case you didn't know, several of the women who accused him of sexual misconduct all pointed out that he wasn't really interested in sex per se, he just wanted massages. According to some, his hygiene was so poor, he developed an infection in his dick, which then rotted the flesh after being left untreated. He basically got gangrene on his genitals and was effectively impotent. He's been described as having fish-like genitals. Ick. Aaron Burr, he was Vice President of the United States when he shot and killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel. The duel killed Burr's political career. He was dropped from Thomas Jefferson's ticket in the 1804 election, and he couldn't even win an election for governor of New York. In 1805, Burr plotted to invade Spanish territories and create his own empire, with a side plot to incite a revolution against the United States. In 1807, Burr was put on trial for treason, and he narrowly escaped conviction. Don't forget he wanted to cause New England to secede from the Union, out of spite. He wasn't willing to wait for it. Benedict Arnold, hero general of the American Revolution, one of George Washington's best assets, felt slighted and overlooked by his contemporaries, switched sides to the British, made no difference to the war effort, died in disgrace in England. His name is now a synonym for traitor. Edit. Since this is getting some attention, for anyone interested in learning more about the man, I highly recommend watching Benedict Arnold, A Question of Honor, a TV movie from 2003, starring Aidan Quinn as Arnold and Kelsey Grammer as Washington. Arnold had 2 horses shot under him, including one at the Battle of Saratoga, where he was instrumental in securing victory at Bemis Heights. Arnold was going between the lines while being shot at, unharmed for most of the battle, as he urged his men on, until both he and his horse was hit with the final volley as the British were fleeing and the Americans were taking the important position. Arnold's leg was shot and broken by the horse. Following this, the British at Saratoga surrendered. This was a major inflection point of the American Revolution, showing Europeans that the Americans were serious and could beat the British on land, and soon foreign aid was given openly. Had Arnold been killed that day, all over the Northeast you would see statues to this man. Instead, there is but one monument to his injured leg in Saratoga that doesn't even say his name. If Ethan Allen didn't screw him over after Saratoga, he would have risen much higher. I'm sure it didn't help that his wife favored the British. I still believe if he was patient just a little while longer, he would have gotten recognized and become a potentially positive player in early American history. Chris Benoit, he was famous as a pro wrestler until he murdered his wife and child. I remember when this came out, I was in disbelief about what happened. Kate is horrible edit. He's obviously still a piece of shit to you, but I think Kette when I think of him. Jared Fogle. He started and ended his career trying to get into smaller pants. Pretty fun fact. The subway he used to frequent went out of business not too long ago. It was in Bloomington, Indiana. He went to the subway when he was a student at U. I passed past it every day to and from work. Now, it's a bakery cafe. Robespierre. His actual death was brutal. For those who don't know, he tried to kill himself, but was stopped and ended up only blowing his own jaw off. He then was kept alive all night with a massive facial injury until he was beheaded in the morning. Just before he was beheaded, the executioner ripped the bandages off his face, and only the guillotine blade silenced his screams. One of the major events that stands out during the French Revolution for me. Didn't he announce one day he had a list of the top 1,000 people who were trying to betray the revolution, but it was late, so he said he would make the list public the next morning. That night, everyone was worried they were on the list, so they all pretty much conspired that night to get rid of him. Edit and the list disappeared that night, if there ever was a list to begin with. Yes, this is a name we need on here, as too few people know about him nowadays. From the incorruptible, fighting for the rights of the common man, as well as Jews and people of color, which was pretty unheard of at the time, to the man who sent tens of thousands to their deaths during the Reign of Terror. His fall from grace, from a savior of the people to villain who got himself beheaded by the mob, is still a tale of caution for every revolutionary. So let me ask you a question about this brave new world of yours. When you've killed all the bad guys, and when it's all perfect and just and fair, when you have finally got it exactly the way you want it, what are you going to do with the people like you, the troublemakers? How are you going to do with the people like you? Protect your glorious revolution from the next one? OG has to be up there. What would the Terminator franchise be like if James Cameron didn't think he was too nice to play a killer? Now he's still having fun golfing and making TikToks, so I don't think he fell hard enough. Philippe Pétain would be one. Good one, excellent example. French hero, Vautoux, Nazi collaborator of Ouilly. Not the biggest, but Armie Hammer casually outing himself as a cannibal was pretty big in it. There is a docuseries about it called House of Hammer. He outed himself. I thought women came forward, and he denied it. I felt my eyes bug out of my head when I read Con rather than Clickhole under the headline on Facebook. Harvey Weinstein. He was Hollywood when he got outed for the posts he is but this guy produced, just naming the top 3, the Lord of the Rings trilogy 2, every Tarantino movie except Hollywood, and 3, Good Will Hunting and subsequently, about every Damon or Affleck project from that time to his downfall. He's won more Oscars than any person could ever dream, and has made more money off films than maybe anyone ever. That guy, oh man, I think he fell the furthest, the hardest, and the fastest. Well deserved, though. Well fucking deserved. Yeah, but everyone knew he was a fucking piece of shit before the rape allegations charges came out. He was known as an absolute monster in the industry. Falling from grace means you had grace to begin with, which he did not. One of his victims said he had Fournier's gangrene around his bits. Never thought the dick would match the face. Whatever you do, do not Google Fournier's gangrene. I take issue with the Lotra point. He is hated by Sir Peter Jackson, and the movies would be terrible if Sir Peter wasn't able to find other money. That being said, Harvey did recognize the potential as Sir Page's resume was questionable at the time. Added Sir before Sir Peter Jackson's name. Additionally, many are asking why I take issue with the point. He still produced it. I'm not disputing that, although I would have reasonable grounds to. I'm disputing that the Lotre films contributed to a gracious image for Weinstein. Grace is a state of admiration. Harvey was not admired for his association with the Lotre films. In fact, the opposite is true. To break his deal with Miramax, Sir Peter had to repay $20 million to Harvey and retain Harvey's executive producer credit. New Line Cinema and Barry Osborne would go on to actually produce the films. Bill Cosby. Hard agree, especially when you consider how inspirational he was to most of the general populace. Many of our household name comedians looked up to him and became comedians because of him, and he was involved in many of the larger civil rights movements across the nation. The fact he was doing what he did to those women for all of those decades is much bigger than any other person I can think of. They say the worst part is the hypocrisy, but I don't think so. I think the worst part is the raping. Rip North. I grew up watching The Cosby Show and was talking to someone just 10 years younger than me, trying to explain the force of wholesome culture that was Bill Cosby. She just looked at me funny and said, "The pudding pop guy." She had heard of The Cosby Show, but thought it was a late-night talk show or something because it was his real name. Did his character have the same name? Would his character have the same name? Was he playing himself? Why wasn't it called The Huxtable Show? Because his name was that big. Young people have no idea how hard he fell. That's a hard one to top. Jim Jones, he originally stood up for civil rights, then he became a cult leader, from a civil rights leader to cult murderer who was responsible for more than 900 deaths. He was always a cult leader. He was just helpful in utilizing his cult, in being able to influence politics, which made him useful to politicians and kept the cult from attracting negative attention. Roses are red, violets are glorious. Don't try to surprise. My advisors in grad school were part of the team of researchers that provided evidence that the prosthetics used by Oscar Pistorius did not provide a significant advantage over biological limbs, thus granting him the ability to compete in the Olympics. They were so proud of that accomplishment, then the news broke. The results were based on a number of factors, but off the top of my head, running economy and running mechanics that are altered due to changes in leg stiffness. They found no energetic benefits and lower leg stiffness. During sprinting, higher stiffness is more ideal for sprinting. In regards to muscles, individuals with transtibial amputations still have to engage their quadriceps and hamstring muscles, as well as many upper body muscles, to run. My son's high school played rugby against Oscar's old high school. Whenever anyone went into the team toilets, they'd call out, "I'm on the loo. Don't shoot me." Small interesting aside, Elon Musk also attended Oscar's high school years before. Have you played the Oscar Pistorius drinking game? Really easy. Every time someone goes to the toilet, you take 2 shots. My kid's middle name is Oscar because I was heavily pregnant during the 2012 Paralympics. He was genuinely a role model before the murdering. My kid does find it a little blackly funny though. Fritz Haber. A German chemist and Nobel Prize winner, he helped pioneer the Haber process for synthesizing ammonia. This is important because it was a key ingredient in artificial fertilizer. His actions enabled the world to feed itself, unlocked the chemistry behind allowing us to grow food that outstrips the consumption of humanity. In the 1900s, he figured out the chemistry behind allows us to make sure no one died of famine ever again. Providing we put in the input, it was now possible to feed the world thanks to him, and he laid the groundwork for further developments, at a time when much of the world was still illiterate and ruled by kings. He has saved countless lives from hunger, untold millions, unlocking a piece of science that changed the face of organic chemistry forever. Then came the First World War. If he were a sorcerer, it would be as if he turned to the darkest of arts. After saving the world and gifting such an innovation to humanity, he then turned his mind to destroying it. He invented chemical warfare, designed chemical weapons from scratch, unleashed chlorine gas, and founded an entire dark science that bore the way to sarin, phosphorus, chlorine, and other unholy weapons of war used by war criminals and tyrants for the next century. He led brigades devoted to chemical war, recruited other renowned scientists to his cause, and turned the science most devoted to creation and change for the betterment of humanity into another weapon. I'm a chemist. This science is the most used, visible, and strikes a balance between raw universal forces and physical applications. It is nothing short of the engineering of reality, shaping the universe like clay in our hands. And he used it to kill on an industrial scale. And thanks to him, there will be no going back. In my mind, he is the greatest fall from grace, from one of humanity's greatest to one its most forsaken. It's nuts. Nearly 50 of the nitrogen atoms in our bodies are from the Haber process. His wife was a chemist. She harbored pacifist beliefs. She took her life using his service revolver after he personally oversaw the use of chlorine gas at Ypres. He remarried. He had a son and 2 daughters. 2 died from suicide as well. His daughter, after her work on a chlorine gas antidote, was defunded in favor of atomic bomb research. His work led to the invention of Zyklon B, which was used in the gas chambers of wheat. In a horrific twist of irony, he was Jewish, and many members of his family were later murdered with it by Nazi Germany. Father of toxic gas and chemical warfare. Not the biggest fall, but Charles Lindbergh deserves to be in the conversation. After making the historic first solo transatlantic flight and gaining the sympathy of many after the kidnapping and murder of his son, he promoted American neutrality in wit. Though he reversed his stance after the attack on Pearl Harbor, many had already branded him a Nazi sympathizer. He eventually did rehabilitate his image, but after his death, it came out that he had 3 separate secret families throughout Europe. So I guess it's a mixed legacy at best. Benedict Arnold would be celebrated as the second most important founding father after George Washington, if not for, well, you know. America loses the Battle of Saratoga without him. Lance Armstrong. Not just the drug thing either. He went to insane lengths to silence people trying to expose the drug scandal within the cycling sphere. He threatened people and publicly harassed and embarrassed people. Even former Tour de France winners weren't safe from his wrath. He was invincible and used it to bludgeon people's careers, reputations, and personal lives. Yeah, his fall was nuts. Kevin Spacey was once my favorite actor, but now I can't look at him the same in any of his works. Facing 7 new charges in England. John Wilkes Booth. Jeffrey Epstein. People forget how ex-presidents and celebrities were lining up to suck this guy's dick until it all went horribly wrong. Don't think they were young enough for him. Icarus. Well, if we're going there, I would argue Lucifer Morningstar. Benedict Arnold has to be on this list. Dude went from a war hero to having his name be synonymous with traitor. Lance Armstrong's reputation shit the bed pretty enthusiastically. The bracelets didn't help. Michael Vick is the big sports one I usually think of. That's not the obvious ones like OJ.